All right, guys, so for this lesson, we are going to start with this video, and I want you to listen to the student's story and decide if you believe him or not. So, do you believe his story? If not, why? So, I would think that for most of us, we would probably be saying, no, we do not believe his story. And that's what we're going to really talk about. So, we are going to be talking about this idea of credibility, reliable, and unreliable. So, we should have probably said we don't believe him, right? So he was kind of looking around the room. He had a really long winded story, which was just ending in him saying that he didn't do his project. So we are going to continue talking about that today with our guiding question, which is what is the difference between a reliable and an unreliable narrator, and what makes a narrator credible? By the end of the lesson, you'll be able to monitor your reading comprehension by determining whether the narrator of a story can be deemed reliable or unreliable, and you will be able to prove your responses by citing text evidence. So, how do we get here? So, we have been in our unit of perspective, which is a literary term which relates to who the narrator in a work is. From that voice or angle of vision or perspective, a story of a literary work is told. So far, the perspectives or points of view we've learned are first person, second person, third person limited, and third person omniscient. So, just as it is important to understand when we cannot rely on what someone is saying to us in person, just like in that video, um, it's also important to understand when we cannot rely on what a narrator is telling us, which could be in literature, TV, or movies, or we could take it as far as to say social media as well. So, what is an unreliable narrator? An unreliable narrator is a storyteller whose credibility has been compromised. This is because they withhold information, lie to, or mislead the reader. An unreliable narrator is almost always told in first person. So, it's really important to keep that in mind. So, for our purposes, we're looking for three things. The first is that the narrator is mentally unstable. The second thing that we'd be looking for is that the narrator could be lying deliberately to us, or the narrator's too young or too naive to give a credible account. So, if a narrator is mentally unstable, they could have an issue like schizophrenia, they could be under the influence of drugs or alcohol. A narrator could just be deliberately lying because they want to mislead you or because they want to be dishonest. And it could be told from a child's perspective, or maybe somebody who is just too naive to really understand that their account is not credible. So, an unreliable narrator actually tells the story most of the time, it's going to be in first person. can be mentally unstable or insane, untrustworthy, exaggerates details, acts strangely, shows biases and lies. Whereas a reliable narrator can use any points of view and knows everything about all the characters, is sane, doesn't show any cases of personal insanity, can be trusted by what is being said, thought, or described because it's usually told through an outside narrator. So when we're determining an unreliable narrator, we read the first few paragraphs of the story or the excerpt that's given to us and ask yourself if the story is written in first person point of view. If it is, then you're going to continue to the next step, which is to pay attention to what the narrator is saying. Do they speak about themselves in the third person? If he or she withholds information or gives partial information to the reader, claims a wrong is done to them by another character without giving probable cause, seeks revenge on another person that has done them wrong, or says that they're not insane. If you can spot at least three of the above things, your narrator is unreliable. So let's look at this example. Reliable or unreliable? I know I said that I always choose the anticlimactic over the irrevocable. And yes, of course, what I meant was that I have always been a coward, but I lied. Not always. There was that night. There was that one time. So this is kind of a mouthful, but the author is basically telling us up front that there's been a time that they've lied and that there is this one time that they haven't been honest. And that's probably going to be the story, tie into the story that they're about to tell us. So this narrator is unreliable. Our next one says, "My name is Towner Whitney." No, that's not exactly true. My real first name is Sophia. Never believe me, I lie all the time. I'm a crazy woman. That last part is true. This narrator has given us a fake name already, admitted to lying, and calls herself crazy, so this is an unreliable narrator. A big jackpot means big dreams, especially for Christina Mealy of Mount Ephraim, New Jersey. I would buy a giant home like a castle and have all my children and grandchildren live with me. With Mega Millions jackpot and 785 million for a Tuesday night's drawing, many people said they'd share money with the families, but they'd also take a sweet vacation. I'd be in the Caribbean for a while, said Brian of Gloucester City. This is from Trish Hartman of the Philadelphia Inquirer. So this is her narrating over the news. This is from a local newspaper. There's no text or anything to suggest that this is not credible. So let's look at our turn. So let's identify the narrator, if they're reliable or unreliable, and prove with text evidence. So it says, "My reflections amount to a story that's mostly made up from memories that are mostly false between people who are mainly not there. She exists in my memories of times when she was there. So that time, the sequence of really what happened seemed to curve around her." Is this narrator reliable or unreliable? If I'm looking from the first thing, I can see that it's made up from memories that are mostly false. She's saying that there's people who were not there. If they exist in memories that she was, they maybe didn't really happen. So I don't think that this person is giving us a really reliable perspective about what they're about to tell us. If you're looking for a story about nice people doing nice things, this isn't for you. You will be burdened with an unreliable narrator who will disappoint and repel you at every turn. Still with me? Too bad. I can't wait to break your heart. So this person comes outright and tells us that they're lying to us. So we know that this is unreliable. But now Jonas had experienced real sadness. He had felt real grief. He knew that there was no quick comfort for emotions like these. He made his way up the stairs slowly. So there is nothing in this excerpt to suggest that there is somebody telling us anything that's unreliable. So I think that this would be a reliable perspective. It's also told in third person, which is usually a hint that it is from a reliable source since it's an outside perspective. Maybe she was not really like that. It's just that I would prefer you to think that what happened to her was justified. So if she's saying maybe she was not really just like that, I think that we're looking at an unreliable narrator. I would prefer you to think what happened so we can tell that maybe this person isn't going to be completely honest with us. For winter 2023, most of the US will be colder than normal this winter, although summer 2023 will be mostly warmer than usual. What's shaping the weather? Recent solar cycle 24 had the lowest level of solar activity in more than 100 years. The weather reporter stood up from his desk and handed the papers to his supervisor. Is this narrator reliable or unreliable? For all the parts of the text suggest that this is a reliable response. So your exit ticket is to complete your assignment, which is to go through 4 questions on the intro of our new topic, which is unreliable narrator. So the first one is, in your own words, what does credible mean? All of the following could be characteristics of an unreliable narrator: mentally unstable, lying, or immaturity, true or false. An unreliable narrator perspective is almost always told in third person, true or false. And your last one, explain why it's important to determine the reliability of not only narrators in our stories, but people in our lives. And you can kind of think about that very first video I showed you of that boy telling us about his project that he did not get to complete.